The neon sign of Ridgetop Cafe buzzed faintly, its pink glow trembling against the Arizona dusk, casting jagged shadows over rust-colored hills. Harland Ridge stood behind the counter, his weathered hands polishing a glass with a faded rag. The diner was still, save for the low hum of an ancient oven and the soft scratch of a pencil from his daughter, Juny, hunched in a corner booth. Her chestnut braids swayed as she sketched, her eyes distant. The air smelled of coffee and warm cornbread, a fragile comfort in the desert's vast silence. Then the bell above the door jangled, sharp and unyielding. A man in a sleek suit, his shoes too polished for the dusty highway, strode inside. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the cracked vinyl booths, the chipped mugs, and Harland's worn flannel shirt. A smirk curled his lips. "You run this shack?" he asked, voice thick with mockery. Harland nodded, his face steady, but his fingers tightened on the glass. The man, Victor Crane, a real estate developer from Phoenix, flicked a business card onto the counter like it was trash. "I'm buying this land. You're out in 30 days. Juny's pencil froze, her sharp eyes darting to her father. Harland's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed low. "Not selling." Victor laughed, a cold, cutting sound that filled the diner. "Look at you, playing house in this dump. Single dad, right? Bet your kid's embarrassed to be seen here." Juny's shoulders stiffened, her notebook snapping shut, the hurt in her gaze raw and unguarded. Harland's knuckles whitened, the rag twisting in his grip, but he held his ground. "We're fine as is." Victor leaned closer, his cologne sharp, his smirk cruel. "Fine. You're barely scraping by. This place reeks of failure, and you're too stubborn to see it." He turned, pausing at the door, his voice dripping venom. "Sign the papers, or I'll bury you." The bell jangled again, and he was gone, his laughter echoing in the desert's empty expanse. Harland stood frozen, the glass still in his hand, its shine dulled by the weight of Victor's words. Juny's eyes burned into him, but she didn't speak. She slid out of the booth, her violin case clutched tight, and slipped out the back door. The oven's hum filled the silence, steady, oblivious. Harland set the glass down, his fingers brushing a framed photo on the wall, Annie, smiling, her hand on a mixing bowl. 3 years gone, and still, her absence was a blade. Victor's words gnawed deeper. Failure. He'd kept the diner running for Juny, for Annie's dream, but what if it wasn't enough? The neon flickered outside, its light weak against the growing dark. Then a shadow moved near the back door, a faint scrape of footsteps on gravel. Harland's hand reached for the flashlight under the counter, his pulse quickening. It wasn't Victor. It was a woman, her coat tattered, her face drawn, 3 children huddled behind her. Her eyes met his, wary but desperate, and something in her hand, a creased piece of paper, caught the neon's fleeting glow. Harland didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just a stranger. She was the answer to a letter written long ago, one that would turn his world upside down. Outside, the desert swallowed the last of the sunset, its amber hues fading into a bruised purple sky. Harland's boots crunched on the tile as he moved toward the back door, the flashlight's beam cutting through the dusk. The woman flinched, stepping in front of her children, her hands raised. "We didn't take anything," she said, voice sharp but trembling. Her eldest, a girl with hollow cheeks, stood rigid, arms crossed like a sentinel. 2 smaller children clung to her, one with mismatched gloves, the other clutching an empty sippy cup. Harland lowered the light, his voice gentle. "Nobody's in trouble. You hungry?" The woman hesitated, her wind-chapped skin catching the neon's glow. "We're not asking for handouts." Harland stepped aside, holding the door open. "Not handouts. Chili's on the stove." The woman's eyes flickered, searching his face, then she nodded, leading her children inside. The diner's warmth enveloped them, the oven's hum a soft pulse. Juny reappeared, her violin case still in hand, her gaze narrowing at the strangers. Harland ladled chili into bowls, slicing cornbread with practiced ease, but his mind was still on Victor's threat. Failure. The word clung like dust. The woman sat straight, spooning soup to her children, but her gaze drifted to Annie's photo on the wall. She froze, her spoon hovering, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Harland didn't notice, but the eldest girl did, her sharp gaze locking onto her mother's hand, where the creased paper peeked from her pocket. The moment passed, but the air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. Harland watched them eat, his heart stirring despite the ache. He didn't know their story, but he knew hunger, loss, and the weight of a world that didn't care. The neon buzzed outside, a faint beacon in the dark. And somewhere in that creased paper, a secret waited, one that would soon unravel everything. The desert night pressed against the diner's windows, its silence broken only by the faint hum of the oven and the occasional creak of a vinyl booth. Harland Ridge sat alone at the counter, the creased letter from the stranger still folded in his pocket, its weight heavier than the diner itself. The amber light cast long shadows across his face, etching the lines of grief that 3 years hadn't softened. Annie's photo stared back from the wall, her smile a quiet accusation. He'd promised her he'd keep their dream alive, keep Juny safe, but Victor's words from earlier gnawed at him. Failure. The word wasn't just an insult, it was a mirror, reflecting every late bill, every slow night, every time Juny hit her violin because lessons cost too much. His fingers traced the edge of Annie's recipe journal, open to honey biscuits for bad days. He hadn't baked them since her funeral, when the scent of honey couldn't mask the emptiness. He closed the journal, his chest tight. Juny was asleep in the mobile home out back, her notebook abandoned, her sharp eyes dulled by the hurt of Victor's mockery. She was 13, old enough to feel their struggles, young enough to think she could fix them. Harland wanted to tell her she didn't have to, that he'd carry the weight, but the truth stopped him. He wasn't sure he could. The diner was all they had, a fragile tether to Annie, but what if it wasn't enough? What if he was failing her memory, failing Juny, failing himself? He stood, pacing to the oven, its warm glow a faint comfort. His reflection wavered in the glass door, a man worn thin by time and promises. He'd been surviving, not living, and the thought of losing the diner felt like losing Annie all over again. The back door creaked, and he turned, expecting Juny. But it was Ellery Quinn, the woman from earlier, her tattered coat draped over her arm, her wind-chapped face softened by the diner's light. Her 3 children were asleep in the mobile home, but she hadn't come for food. Her eyes held something else, grief, maybe, or a secret she wasn't ready to share. Couldn't sleep, she said, voice low. Harland nodded, offering a mug of coffee. She took it, her fingers brushing the creased paper in her pocket. You look like you're carrying the world, she said, her gaze drifting to Annie's photo. Harland's throat tightened. Feels like it sometimes. She didn't push, but her silence invited more. He didn't know why, but he spoke. This place was hers. Annie's. I'm just trying to hold it together. Ellery's eyes flickered, her hand tightening on the mug. Holding on's harder than letting go, she said, almost to herself. Harland looked at her, seeing the same exhaustion he felt, the same quiet fight to keep going. Her children's hollow cheeks, their 2 small shoes, told a story of loss as deep as his own. He wanted to ask, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he pulled a tin of biscuits from the counter, offering one. Not much, but it's warm. Ellery took it, her fingers trembling slightly. She broke it in half, the steam rising like a memory. My kids haven't eaten like this in weeks, she whispered. Harland's chest ached. He saw Juny and her children, saw Annie in her tired strength. The oven hummed, steady, a heartbeat in the dark. Ellery's gaze drifted to the photo again, her expression unreadable. She looks kind, she said. Harland nodded, unable to speak. The letter in her pocket felt heavier now, its words burning in her mind. She didn't tell him, not yet, but her eyes held a promise, or a warning. The desert wind rattled the windows, and Harland felt it, a shift in the air, like the calm before a storm. He didn't know what Ellery was hiding, but he knew it would change everything, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. The morning sun crept over the Arizona hills, its pale light filtering through the diner's dusty windows, painting the vinyl booths in soft gold. Harland Ridge flipped pancakes on the griddle, the sizzle a quiet rhythm against the oven's steady hum. Juny sat in her corner booth, her violin case unopened beside her, her pencil scratching half-hearted circles in her notebook. The air smelled of coffee and warm butter, but the weight of last night's silence lingered. Ellery Quinn emerged from the mobile home out back, her 3 children trailing her. Maisie, her eldest, scanned the room like a soldier, her hollow cheeks flushed from sleep. Flora's mismatched gloves dangled from her hands, her eyes darting with curiosity. Toby clutched a crumpled napkin, whispering to it as if it held secrets. Ellery tied an apron around her waist, her movements quick but careful, her wind-chapped skin catching the morning glow. She hadn't spoken of the letter since last night, but her fingers brushed her pocket, where it stayed folded, its edges worn from years of being carried. Harland offered her a spatula, his voice low. "Pancakes need flipping." She nodded, stepping beside him, their elbows brushing in the small kitchen. Juny's pencil paused, her sharp eyes tracking Ellery's every move. The diner felt alive, but fragile, like a melody played on a single string. Then the bell jangled, and a woman in a faded sundress stepped inside, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun. She wasn't a regular, but her eyes held a quiet familiarity as they landed on Ellery. "Coffee, please," she said, settling at the counter. Harland poured a mug, but the woman's gaze stayed on Ellery, who was stacking pancakes with steady hands. "You look like someone I knew," the woman said, her voice soft but pointed. Ellery froze, her spatula hovering, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Must be the desert light," she replied, forcing a smile. The woman tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Maybe. But there's a way you move, like you're carrying something heavy. Reminds me of a friend from years back." Harland glanced over, catching the tension in Ellery's shoulders. Maisie, wiping a table nearby, paused, her sharp gaze locking onto the woman. The air thickened, the oven's hum suddenly louder. The woman sipped her coffee, her fingers tracing the mug's rim. "She used to talk about a diner like this," she said, almost to herself. "Said it was a place where broken things got fixed." Ellery's smile faltered, her hand slipping to her pocket, where the letter waited. "Lots of diners out here," she said, turning back to the griddle. The woman nodded, but her eyes lingered, searching, as if piecing together a puzzle. Juny's notebook snapped shut, her braids swaying as she leaned forward, watching the exchange like a hawk. Flora, coloring at a nearby table, looked up, her mismatched gloves still. "Do you know my mama?" she asked, voice bright but piercing. The woman smiled faintly. "Not sure, sweetheart. But I might have known someone who knew her." Ellery's spatula clattered against the griddle, a small sound that felt like a crack in the morning's calm. Harland stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Everything okay?" Ellery nodded, too quickly, her eyes avoiding his. The woman finished her coffee, left a crumpled bill, and stood. "Keep that oven warm," she said, her gaze lingering on Ellery. "It's got stories to tell." The bell jangled as she left, her footsteps fading into the desert's quiet. Ellery exhaled, her shoulders sagging, but her hand stayed on the letter, its weight heavier now. Harland watched her, a question forming, but he didn't ask. Juny's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on her pencil. Maisie resumed wiping the table, but her movements were slower, her gaze darting to her mother. The diner's light shifted, the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows across the floor. The oven hummed, steady, but something was stirring, a secret coiled tight in that creased paper, ready to unravel when the moment was right. And outside, the desert held its breath, waiting for the truth to break free. The Arizona sun climbed higher, its heat pressing against the diner's windows, turning the amber light inside Ridgetop Cafe into a warm, flickering glow. Harland Ridge stood behind the counter, slicing peaches with a steady hand, the knife's rhythm a quiet anchor. Ellery Quinn worked beside him, her apron dusted with flour, her movements quick but precise as she rolled dough for biscuits. Juny sat in her booth, her violin case untouched, her sharp eyes darting between her father and Ellery. Maisie, Flora, and Toby clustered at a table, coloring napkins with crayons, their soft giggles a fragile contrast to the tension simmering in the air. The oven hummed, its glow steady, but the weight of the morning's encounter with the silver-haired woman lingered. Ellery's hand brushed her pocket, where the creased letter rested, its edges worn from years of being carried. The bell jangled, sharp and unwelcome, and Victor Crane strode in, his suit pristine, his smirk as cutting as ever. "Still playing house, Ridge," he said, tossing a new contract onto the counter, its pages crisp and heavy. "Sign it, or I'll have this place condemned by Friday." Harland's knife paused, juice dripping from the peach in his hand. Juny's pencil snapped in her grip, the sound sharp in the quiet. Ellery straightened, her eyes meeting Victor's, but he barely glanced at her, his gaze fixed on Harland. "You're out of time," Victor said, leaning closer, his voice low and cruel. "This diner's a joke, and you're the punchline. A washed-up dad in a dead-end town." Juny's chair scraped as she stood, her braids swaying, her eyes blazing. Harland set the knife down, his jaw tight, but before he could speak, Ellery stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "He's not signing." Victor laughed, turning to her, his smirk twisting. "And you are?" "The hired help." "Stay out of this, sweetheart." Ellery didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the creased letter, its paper trembling slightly in her hand. The diner went still, the ovens hummed the only sound. "I'm not the help," she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a storm. "I'm someone Annie Ridge sent." Harland's breath caught, his eyes locking onto the letter. Victor's smirk faltered, his brows knitting. Ellery unfolded the paper, her gaze steady on Harland. "I found this in a charity shop in Tucson, 2 years ago. Annie wrote it before she died. She asked a stranger to find her family, to bring them light." She handed the letter to Harland, her fingers brushing his. He took it, his hands shaking, and read the words in Annie's unmistakable handwriting, "Find my family. Remind them to live." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the truth settled. Juny stepped closer, her eyes wide, her violin case forgotten. Maisie's crayon stilled, her soldier's posture softening as she watched her mother. Flora and Toby looked up, sensing the shift, their napkins crumpled in their hands. Victor's face paled, his contract forgotten on the counter. "That's impossible," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Harland's eyes glistened, the letter trembling in his grip. "Annie," he whispered, his voice breaking. Ellery met his gaze, her own eyes brimming. "She knew you'd need someone. She sent me." The words landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the diner. Victor took a step back, his polished shoes scuffing the floor, his smirk gone. Harland looked at Ellery, then at her children, their hollow cheeks and wary eyes now glowing with something new, hope. The oven's glow seemed brighter, its hum a heartbeat echoing Annie's love. Juny's hand found Harland's arm, her touch tentative but warm. Maisie stepped closer to her mother, her tin box clutched tight. Victor grabbed his contract, his hands unsteady, and muttered something about lawyers, but no one listened. The bell jangled as he fled, the desert swallowing his retreat. Harland folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket, his chest rising with a breath he hadn't taken in years. Ellery's hand rested on the counter, flour dusting her knuckles, her eyes steady but soft. The diner felt alive, its walls pulsing with a miracle no one had seen coming. And outside, the desert shimmered, as if Annie herself was watching, smiling, her light finally reaching them all. The Arizona dusk settled over Ridgetop Cafe, its neon sign casting a soft pink glow across the gravel lot, where Victor Crane's car had left tire marks in his hasty retreat. Inside, the diner was quiet, the amber light bathing the worn booths in a warm hush. Harland Ridge stood by the counter, Annie's letter folded in his hand, its words still echoing in his chest. Ellery Quinn leaned against the oven, her apron dusted with flour, her wind-chapped face softened by the weight of what she'd revealed. Juny sat in her booth, her violin case open now, her fingers tracing the strings as if they might hold answers. Maisie, Flora, and Toby clustered at a table, their crayons stilled, their eyes darting between the adults. The oven hummed, its glow a steady pulse, but the air was thick with the aftermath of truth. Harland's gaze drifted to Annie's photo on the wall, her smile no longer a weight but a bridge. He looked at Ellery, his voice low. "You carried that letter for years. Why now?" Ellery's eyes met his, steady but brimming. "I didn't know if I'd find you. But when I saw her picture, I knew." Her voice wavered, and she brushed her pocket, where the letter had lived so long. Juny's fingers stilled on her violin, her sharp gaze softening, a tear slipping down her cheek. Maisie clutched her tin box, her soldier's posture easing, as if the truth had loosened something inside her. The bell jangled softly, and every head turned. Victor Crane stepped back inside, his suit rumpled, his smirk gone. His eyes darted to the letter in Harland's hand, then to Ellery, who stood unflinching. He cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. I didn't know," he said, the words stumbling out. "About your wife, about the letter. I was just doing business." Harland's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Ellery stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Business doesn't give you the right to tear people down." Victor's face flushed, his polished shoes scuffing the floor. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his hands fidgeting with the contract he'd left behind. "I'm pulling the offer," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can keep this place." He looked at Harland, then Ellery, his eyes flickering with something like shame. "I'm sorry," he added, the words awkward, unpracticed. He turned to leave, but paused, glancing at Juny. "Your dad's not a failure. I was wrong." The bell jangled as he slipped out, the desert swallowing his footsteps. The diner exhaled, the tension unwinding like a held breath. Harland set the letter down, his hand steady now, and looked at Juny. She nodded, a small, fragile smile breaking through. Ellery knelt beside Maisie, who was watching her mother with wide eyes. "You stood up for them," Maisie whispered, her voice soft but proud. Ellery brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Sometimes you have to." Flora and Toby crept closer, their napkins crumpled in their hands, and Toby tugged Ellery's sleeve. "Does this mean we're staying?" Ellery smiled, her eyes glistening. "For now, sweetheart." Harland stepped to the oven, its hum a quiet comfort, and pulled out a tray of honey biscuits, the ones he hadn't baked since Annie died. He set one on a plate for each of them, the steam rising like a promise. Juny took hers, her fingers trembling, and broke it in half, the scent filling the air. The children ate in silence, their faces glowing in the diner's light, and Harland felt something shift, a weight lifting, not gone, but lighter. Ellery met his gaze across the counter, her hand resting on Maisie's shoulder. The diner's walls seemed to pulse, holding not just grief but possibility. Outside, the neon flickered, its glow steady now, a beacon in the dark. And somewhere in the desert's vast silence, another traveler was already drawing near, pulled by a light they couldn't yet name. The Arizona dawn broke softly, its pale light slipping through the diner's windows, bathing Ridgetop Cafe in a gentle gold. The neon sign outside flickered off, its pink glow yielding to the sunrise. Harland Ridge stood at the counter, his weathered hands arranging a tray of lemon scones, their scent mingling with the oven's warm hum. Ellery Quinn swept the floor nearby, her apron still dusted with flour, her wind-chapped face softened by a quiet ease. Juny sat by the window, her violin resting in her lap, her chestnut braid catching the morning light as she played a soft, halting melody, Annie's lullaby, the notes fragile but sure. Maisie, Flora, and Toby worked at a table, folding napkins into uneven stars, their laughter a delicate ripple. The air felt different, lighter, as if the diner's walls had exhaled years of grief. Harland's fingers brushed Annie's letter, now tucked into the recipe journal, its words a tether to the woman who'd sent Ellery to them. He glanced at her photo on the wall, her smile no longer a wound but a spark. The bell jangled, and a young woman in a faded jacket stepped inside, her eyes wide with hesitation. "Heard about this place on the radio," she said, clutching a crumpled newspaper clipping. "Said you serve miracles." Harland smiled, sliding a scone onto a plate. "Just food, but you're welcome to it." She sat, her hands trembling as she ate, her gaze darting to the oven's glow. Ellery joined her, offering a mug of coffee. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. The woman nodded, tears brimming. "Lost my brother last year. This place, it feels like he's here." Ellery's eyes softened, and she touched the woman's hand. "Sometimes they find a way to stay." The woman wiped her eyes, leaving a folded napkin with a scribbled, "Thank you," before slipping out. Juny's melody paused, her eyes following the woman, then landing on Harland. She stood, crossing to him, her violin still in hand. "You didn't have to keep this place open," she said, her voice low but steady. "But I'm glad you did." Harland's throat tightened, and he pulled her into a hug, her braid brushing his shoulder. "Couldn't have done it without you," he whispered. Maisie approached Ellery, her tin box clutched tight, its paper star peeking out. "You made it safe here," she said, her soldier's posture gone, her eyes bright. Ellery knelt, cupping her daughter's face. "We made it safe, Maisie." Flora and Toby ran over, their napkin stars scattering across the floor. Toby held one up, its edges crumpled. "It's for the wish jar," he said, grinning. "So everybody stays." Ellery laughed, her eyes glistening, and tucked the star into her pocket. The oven hummed, its glow a heartbeat, and Harland felt it, a healing, not just for him, but for all of them. He stepped outside, the desert air cool against his skin, and looked at the horizon, where cacti stood like silent sentinels. Ellery joined him, her hands still dusted with flour. "They're stronger than I thought," she said, nodding toward the children. Harland met her gaze. "So are you." She smiled, a real smile, unburdened by the weight she'd carried for years. The diner's light spilled onto the gravel, a soft beacon in the morning's quiet. Juny's melody floated through the open door, weaving Annie's lullaby with something new, something alive. Maisie and the younger children laughed inside, their voices a chorus of hope. The young woman's napkin still lay on the counter, its "thank you" a small, human mark of what this place had become. Harland's chest swelled, not with grief, but with purpose. The diner wasn't just a building, it was a home, a refuge, a miracle baked one scone, one star, one kind word at a time. And as the sun climbed higher, its light catching the desert's endless expanse, Harland knew Annie's love hadn't just brought Ellery here, it had taught them all how to live again. But something else was coming, a shadow on the horizon, a new traveler drawn to the diner's glow, carrying a story no one could yet imagine. The Arizona twilight draped itself over Ridgetop Cafe, its neon sign flickering back to life, casting a soft pink glow across the gravel lot. The desert stretched wide, its rust-colored hills fading into a bruised purple sky, the air cool and still. Inside, the diner hummed with quiet warmth, the oven's glow a steady heartbeat. Harland Ridge stood behind the counter, his weathered hands folding a stack of napkins, their edges worn but clean. Ellery Quinn sat at a booth, her apron discarded, her wind-chapped face lit by a candle's flicker as she sketched bakery ideas on a scrap of paper. Juny leaned against the window, her violin tucked under her chin, playing a melody that wove Annie's lullaby with her own notes, bold and unbroken. Maisie, Flora, and Toby sprawled on the floor, their napkin stars scattered like a constellation, Toby giggling as he added a lopsided one to the wish jar. The diner felt full, not of customers, but of something deeper, a home forged from broken pieces. Harland's gaze drifted to Annie's photo on the wall, her smile now a quiet companion. The letter, tucked into her recipe journal, had done more than bring Ellery, it had rewritten their story. He stepped to the oven, its hum a comfort, and pulled out a single cupcake, lemon honey, its whipped cream frosting smooth and unadorned. He set it on the counter, a silent offering, not for anyone, but for the moment itself. The bell jangled softly, and a boy stepped inside, no older than 16, his backpack sagging, his shoes caked with desert dust. His eyes were wary, but they softened at the diner's warmth. "Heard this place was different," he said, voice low. Harland nodded, sliding a scone across the counter. "Sit. Eat." The boy hesitated, then sat, his hands trembling as he broke the scone. Ellery looked up, her pencil pausing, and smiled. "You got a name?" she asked. "Caleb," he said, barely audible. Maisie glanced over, her tin box in her lap, and nudged Toby. "Give him a star," she whispered. Toby scampered over, holding out a crumpled napkin star. "It's for wishes," he said, grinning. Caleb blinked, taking it, his fingers brushing the paper as if it might vanish. Juny's melody slowed, her eyes meeting Caleb's. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady. Caleb nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek, and tucked the star into his pocket. Harland watched, his chest tight, seeing himself in the boy's guarded hope, seeing Annie in the diner's light. He stepped outside, the desert air sharp against his skin, and looked at the neon sign, its buzz a quiet promise. Ellery joined him, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "He'll stay," she said, nodding toward Caleb. Harland smiled. "They always do." The diner's glow spilled onto the gravel, a beacon for the lost. Inside, Juny played on, her notes rising like a prayer. Maisie handed Caleb a mug of cocoa, her soldier's posture gone, her eyes bright with kindness. Flora and Toby laughed, their stars glowing in the candlelight. Harland's hand brushed the recipe journal in his pocket, where a new note lay, written in his own hand, "Keep the oven warm. She's still here." He looked at Ellery, then at the diner, its walls holding not just grief, but love, woven through every scone, every star, every stranger who'd found their way. The cupcake sat on the counter, its frosting untouched, a quiet echo of the night Ellery had arrived, hungry and lost, carrying Annie's letter. Now, it wasn't an end, but a beginning. The desert stretched on, its silence vast, but the diner stood firm, its light cutting through the dark. And somewhere down the highway, another traveler was already walking, drawn to a glow they couldn't name, carrying a story that would find its place among the stars. The oven hummed, soft and alive, and Harland knew, whatever came next, they'd be ready, because Annie's miracle wasn't just in the letter, it was in them all, baked into the heart of this place, forever.